Alright guys, first layout update. I started the bench work on this layout about 2 years ago. It was going to be for another layout. It was going to be an HON3 layout. The prototype I've chosen to model is the Quincy Railroad, which is a short line in Northern California. Some of you might be familiar with it. It runs approximately 3 miles from East Quincy, the Sierra Pacific Lumber Mill, up to the Union Pacific Canyon Subdivision. That's the Feather River route. Interchanges cars there, and pretty much that's the only customer. It's actually owned by the Sierra Pacific Industries itself. It used to be a common carrier, but is no longer. I'm modeling it in the 2005 to 2007 era. 2 locomotives. First locomotive I have here is number 5. It's an SW 1200. This is a Walthers Proto 2000 model that I've painted and modified to fit the prototype of number 5. You got the P3 coming off the cab right there. Spark arresters. I cut down the regular twin exhaust per the prototype and put these spark arresters on. These are actually 3D printed. I designed them myself based on photos and printed them and installed them. I've also cut out the radiator grill and the fan in the front. These are molded in, non-see-through from the factory. I cut them out, put the KV models photo etched grills in, and there's actually a radiator fan on the front one. I don't think you could see it. Kind of funny, you know, went to all that work to put it in and, well, you don't see it, but it's there. This is the radiator core, and that'll be going in the top here, so you'll actually get to see the radiator core through the grill. I haven't installed it because it conflicts with the current configuration of where the LED for the headlight is. I'm probably going to have to modify that, put a little surface mount or something in there so it's real tight fit, tight clearance between the front of this and the inside of the shell there, so I'm going to have to do some ingenuity to get that in there. I painted the top part, the plastic part, which consists of the hood and the cab, and I still got to get the decals on. I got to actually make the decals, print the decals for the Quincy Railroad, which blue lettering right there in the middle of the stripe. The other thing I have to do is build the little handrails, which actually are deck mounted on these locomotives. I've got another one. I got to do number 12, which is the other locomotive that this line currently has on it. It's an SW7, and it's also going to be a Walthers Proto 2000 model, the older version, but it's going to have the Pacific Northwest Resins shell on it because nobody really is making a decent plastic SW7 right now, and Pacific Northwest Resins has a shell for an SW7, so it'll be easier to modify some of the deck things like the handrails and stuff when it's made out of resin, because you can drill into that and glue's easier. So that'll be the next locomotive. So I'll have 12 and 5, and the 12 is lettered for Sierra Pacific Industries, Susanville, California, because both these locomotives came from the Amador Central, transferred, and 5 went to the Quincy. This was actually Amador Central number 11. They renumbered it to 5 because that was the next number in the series for the Quincy Railroad, which dates back way to the early 1900s, 1917 or so, when the Quincy Railroad was formed. They only had 4 locomotives up to the point that they got the number 11, so they renumbered it 5. The 12, which was in the same paint scheme, went over to the Susanville operation, which actually was a division of the Quincy Railroad. And it ran from Susanville, the lumber mill there, out to Wendell, interchange with the Southern Pacific, later the Union Pacific. About 2004, that operation shut down, so they transferred the 12 over to the Quincy Railroad, and it's pretty much been operating there ever since in the Susanville Sierra Pacific Industries paint scheme, which is the same paint scheme as this, but the lettering is different. So I'll have both these locomotives in their about 2005, 2006 paint schemes. I've also built up a fleet here of Walthers and Atlas center beams that would be appropriate for use on the Quincy, mostly TTZX with some UP and some other road names in there, but this would be a relatively correct, accurate representation of the kind of center beams that'd be coming in and out of Quincy. And I got the Walthers Sierra Pacific Industries lumber loads, which are correct for this operation in this era, which is great because I don't have to make them. They're already commercially available. Two interesting areas on the prototype. There's the interchange with the Union Pacific at Quincy Junction, and then there's the mill area. There's no switches in between, no sidings. It's just all main line, secondary, short line, main line, through fields and up through pine trees and stuff. So I've elected to model the mill end since it's flat. It offers more operational flexibility and switching. The Quincy Junction end is actually more scenic, but it just would not fit in the space I have. This is a 14-inch deep by 125-inch long shelf that goes into an L configuration, comes out 67 inches, and it just really is not a lot when you're talking about trying to model a prototype with different elevations and modeling the Union Pacific Canyon Subdivision and the Quincy Railroad, because at Quincy Junction, to make the operations work, you'd have to have both sides operating. You'd have to have the Union Pacific bringing down the empties from Portola and interchanging them to the Quincy, and the Quincy dropping off the loads and everything. It'd be great, real interesting part of the railroad to model, but I just don't have the room. So I'm modeling the mill end, which will be just exclusively the Quincy Railroad. There'll be a 4-car runaround in here, which is basically doubles as the empty storage track, so the locomotive can get off that end, run around to this end, and shove the empties into the mill complex, which will be down here on this leg of the layout. There'll be an engine house right here, one stall engine house. The way the Quincy works is one of the locomotives is in the engine house usually, and the other one's either out on the railroad or just sitting outside the engine house, so that's what I'm going to model. There'll be a track that comes right off in the curve somewhere. There'll be a switch. It'll come out, and that'll be the loading track in the mill complex. This will all be paved over and have lumber loads. And the real loading track can handle 4 center beams at a time. Probably fit 2 or 3 here. Kind of have to compress, but it's a smaller layout, so that'll work for me. There'll be a little creek in here. There's a little creek that passes under the track right outside the mill complex. And there'll be also another spur track that'll come off in the foreground here, run parallel down into the curve, and that'll be for more car storage and MOW equipment and the other stuff that Quincy has there. Backdrop is going to be a photographic backdrop from Train Junkies, which sells a bunch of different photographic backdrops. They actually have a backdrop of mountains that was taken in Quincy, so it's perfect for this. So I've ordered that, and that'll be going up when I get it. There's actually 2 segments to it, and I'm thinking about, I'm going to hold off. I haven't glued down any of the extruded pink foam yet. I'm going to hold off till I got the backdrop. The reason being is the backdrop's 18 inches, and I made the masonite backdrop exactly 18 inches. So to avoid cutting or folding, I think I'm just going to hold off and start the bottom edge of the backdrop at the bottom here. And that also works because the backdrop that they have, the photographic backdrop, was taken at the Quincy airport, and the very bottom of the frame actually shows the runway, and I don't want the runway in the backdrop at all. So if I can cover the bottom edge with the 1-inch extruded foam, it'll hopefully get rid of that runway, and you won't see it in the finished product. I'm also going to be using probably a cork road bed. I actually bought a bunch of the HO scale cork, but then I realized it's just the profile is way too high. It's made for mainline, and this is a secondary short line. It has a little bit of a ballast profile, but it's not nearly that high. So I think I'm going to use the end scale cork, which I've seen other guys do, and that'll be just a very subtle profile that'll work well, and I can just ballast over that. So that's kind of what's going on with the layout. This lighting is from my old layout. Some of you might remember the few videos I made of the time saver layout, which is a little Oregon switching layout. It was only 6 feet long. It's about 10 inches deep, 8 inches deep, I forget. It's in the attic. But this is the old valance from that, and it has a fluorescent light in it. And I really didn't experiment with lighting or really read into it when I built that layout. So this is gonna go. I'm gonna build the new upper deck, and I'm thinking about experimenting with the LED strip tape lighting, because I've seen other guys do that, and it's a really effective way to get a nice even daytime color temperature light. That's where the layout pretty much stands right now. Still waiting on things to come in. I'll be using DCC, NCE like I always have, power cab. Really only designed to be running one locomotive at a time, so it won't be a big issue just to have the power cab. So excited about it, excited to get stuff moving on it. Lay track, which I'm still waiting on the backdrop, and I'm going to glue down the foam. So get the fascia board's going to cover both the 1-inch foam and the plywood here, and that'll be painted black. I like the shadow box effect. I like when you step back and you kind of see the border, the top and the bottom, because it masks the light and makes it very clean and draws your attention in to the actual scenery and the layout and the trains, and you're not looking at the walls and other parts of the room. It's kind of, I like that professional museum kind of lighting. So thanks for watching, and if you have any suggestions, please leave a comment, like, subscribe. I'll be hopefully posting a lot more as I go along. But thanks for watching.